Hello, and welcome to another episode of Shattered Lives, the Irish Daily Star's crime podcast. I'm crime and defence editor Mick O'Toole, and I'm joined today, as usual, by our crime correspondent Paul Healy. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Mick.
It's been another busy week. Do you ever sit there and think, do you know what? Not a day. I would love a week where there's not much happening.
Never.
Even, and we're going to talk about some of the stories you've been doing, but even so, today's Thursday. On Wednesday night, there was a late breaking story, a terrible tragedy in Phibsborough about a lady killed by a car that had it was a hit and run basically. And they were just sitting there and it just consumes you. Because I was sitting watching Man City actually, and then this happened, and everything drops, and you could be working from 8 o'clock in the morning, and then just stories happen throughout the night. I've had stories break at 11:30, 11:45, and it's a constant barrage of stories. But anyway, we are where we are. How was your week?
It's been busy, but as you say, just it's usually those weeks that aren't busy that then a story like that happens late at night. Yeah, so it can happen at any time. This has also been so this month the courts have resumed in the CCJ. So there have been a number of trials that have either resumed or began this month. So it's busy down in the CCJ. We don't always get to cover every trial. But there are some pretty high-profile trials starting now this month that we're going to be poking our heads in and out of.
Yes, so we'll talk. You were obviously at Mr. Cervi yesterday, but earlier in the week you were in court for the Ashling Murphy murder trial. Now that has been delayed, but it's going to be taking place. I think it's going to be in the next fortnight. Is it? It's going to start per se.
Yeah, we should probably just say from the outset to explain to our listeners that we are somewhat restrained in our reporting of these trials because they are before a jury. So it's not the same as, say, the Hutch trial, which was a non-jury court, so we had a bit of freedom. So I'm just going to be able to explain to you the very basic facts of the case you're talking about, but we have to be cautious about going into too much detail. We can only really report and talk about what's being said in court before the jury. So yeah, the trial began this week of Jozef Puska, and he is a 32-year-old man. He's accused of the murder of Ashling Murphy. He's an address at Lynally Grove in Muckla, County Offaly, and this murder is alleged to have occurred in Tullamore in January of last year. So that trial was set to begin this week, but we learned in the case that there are going to be issues that need to be discussed, and those issues will be discussed outside of a jury. So for the next 2 weeks, you're not going to be really hearing about this case. So in 2 weeks' time, this matter will be before the jury, and it's set to be a lengthy trial.
Yeah. So just referring back, obviously we did have leeway with the Jerry Hutch trial, but I remember in 2015 there was a trial. It was really the first trial we did live tweeting. It was the trial of Graham Dwyer. So I live tweeted that, and it's journalistically it's very interesting because it was the first, as I say, it was the first trial that was live tweeted in Ireland. But essentially, if we do talk about it on Shattered Lives, if we do talk about any of these jury trials, they'll essentially be elongated court reports. There won't be any discussion that we did about it. It'll just be, this is what was said, this is what was said in front of the jury, and that'll be it.
Yeah, and look, there's lots of interest in trials even before they begin. You know, in general, when you're in the early stages of a trial, there's what's known as legal argument, and that is where I suppose issues that are things that may come up in the trial are discussed. So it's important for reporters to kind of sit in on that and get the full details of what the evidence is and what the defense is arguing maybe shouldn't be heard before a jury. So matters like that, it's typical before a trial really begins.
And we're not talking about and we're not talking about any specific trial. We're just talking.
That'd be the case
in any trial.
In any trial, yeah.
But you were in the CCJ I think yesterday in relation to another murder trial that has started.
Yeah, so this is a trial that began before the Central Criminal Court yesterday, and this is the trial of Gerard Cervi. He is a 36-year-old man. He's from East Wall in Dublin, and he is accused of the murder of Bobby Messett, in Bray Boxing Club, all the way back in 2018, June 5th, 2018. And he's also accused of the attempted murder of well-known boxing coach Pete Taylor, and of another man named Ian Britton. So the facts of this case were heard in the opening statement by the prosecution. Mr. Paul Murray, senior counsel, outlined the facts of the case before the jury. So it's 6 men and 6 women in that jury, and they were sworn in. And Mr. Cervi then was arraigned and pleaded not guilty to murder and to the attempted murder of Pete Taylor and Ian Britton, all on the same date. At Bray Boxing Club in 2018. So Mr. Murray outlined that the allegations of this incident is that there was a class happening, a exercise class happening in the upstairs room of Bray Boxing Club just before 7 a.m. on that morning, June 5th, 2018. And the class was being led by Pete Taylor. And a gunman came up the stairs and stood in the doorway and fired shots into the room. And the first shots hit the person that was closest to the gunman, that was the victim in this case, Mr. Messett. So Mr. Messett was shot in the head and died quickly, Mr. Murray said there at the scene. Then other shots sprayed across the room. A total of 9 shots were fired by this gunman. And we heard that the shots hit Ian Britton, and he survived his injuries. And then the shots also hit Pete Taylor, who the allegations of the facts are he ran towards the gunman, and in his attempt to run at the gunman, he was then subsequently shot himself, and he also survived the incident. So Mr. Murray then just outlined, it's up to the jury to determine beyond all reasonable doubt if they are to find Mr. Cervi guilty. They need to find that beyond all reasonable doubt. And he was explaining just how that process works. And in the law, he was saying, there isn't really any definition of that as such. But they have to presume throughout this trial, which is going to last between 6 to 7 weeks, that Mr. Cervi is innocent, and until they decide otherwise. And just in relation to the murder charge, so they under Section 4 of the Act, basically they can find if there was an intent to murder or cause serious injury, whereas in the attempted murder charge they have to find that there was an intent to murder. So that's the difference there. So they have to find that there was an intent to murder Pete Taylor and Ian Britton, but they have to find, if they're going that way, and they have to find whether there was intent to cause serious injury or murder the victim, in this case, Bobby Messett.
And did we have any indication of how long they expect this trial to last?
Yes, they expect the trial to last between 6 to 7 weeks. There are going to be over 300 witnesses in this case. So there is a lot to be heard. There's going to be maps and over 5 hours of CCTV. And Mr. Murray, he went into a good bit of detail there yesterday, outlining in general what the prosecution's case is going to be. So we did get an insight into the allegations that the state is making against Mr. Cervi. And the facts of that are that there was a van used in this murder. That's what the state alleges, and it had a British registration, a yellow registration on it, and it was captured on CCTV coming into Bray Harbour and parked outside Bray Boxing Club. And there is an individual captured on CCTV wearing a yellow high-vis jacket and a cap, who was seen going in the direction of Bray Boxing Club shortly before the shooting occurs, and is then seen leaving the scene. The prosecution alleges that this is Mr. Cervi. The van then goes to an area called Pigeon House Road. People might be familiar with that location in the north of the city, near the Eastlink toll bridge there. And the van was parked there, and it was subsequently discovered once kind of word got out of this shooting the guards were alerted to this scene, we were told, of this van. What's just in terms of the detail of what they discovered in that van, they found 3 white spirit bottles, and we were told yesterday that the prosecution will allege through a fingerprint expert that there are fingerprints found on 2 of those bottles, and that they were analysed, and that an expert has determined those fingerprints, alleges those fingerprints to be Mr. Cervi's fingerprints on bottles inside the van that the state will allege is the van that was used in the crime. There's also going to be DNA introduced in this case, which the state will allege that there was DNA found in relation to this van that they will say has a connection to Mr. Cervi. And then there's also extensive CCTV. We were shown just stills of this, so we're going to be shown this in more detail throughout the case, but we were shown, as the stills I mentioned there of the individual in the yellow vis jacket. We also saw stills of an individual in a high vis jacket, this time an orange high vis jacket, on a bicycle in the Pigeon House Road area, in the Russell Avenue area, where we were told Mr. Cervi's parents live, his family home. And there's also CCTV inside a McDonald's restaurant in the East Wall area, where there's an individual that the state alleges is Mr. Cervi in the restaurant. And they say that this occurred just before the van was moved. And their allegation is that Mr. Cervi moved that van prior to and subsequent to the murder at Bray Boxing Club. So those are just that's a general overall sense of where this trial is going to go over the next 6 or 7 weeks. We're going to hear from witnesses. There's going to be members from Garda Síochána and persons who would have a connection to this case inside and outside of the boxing club. So yeah, the next 6 to 7 weeks, we're going to be hearing all of that.
So we'll see how that develops. But just that's obviously a current murder case. Can we talk about a very old murder case that came up again this week? And it's quite remarkable. I remember covering this when it happened. So I think yesterday was the 19th anniversary of the murder of Rachel Callaly.
Yes, now I can take my legal hat off and talk a bit freer.
Yeah. So, because I always remember I covered.
Yes, it is.
I remember that I still remember that day, because I still remember somebody tell me there's been a death of a lady. They said no, right? So it's that area, and it might be suspicious. And that's how these stories sort of emerge. You don't sort of hear. Sometimes you do if there's a gun murder or something, but more often than not, it would be a person's body has been found and it's been looked at. So I can remember the first call we got about this was, right, woman's body found, and it's suspicious. And then it was very quickly upgraded to murder. But oh my God, did that murder case which was known as Rachel O'Reilly, but obviously Rachel Callaly, did that dominate Irish crime life? So the murder happened in 2004. Joe O'Reilly was convicted of the murder of his wife at the end of June 2007. I was there, a remarkable day when it happened. But you were speaking to Rose Callaly, Rachel's mother, to mark the anniversary of the murder.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. 19 years since Rachel was murdered, and there's still, this shows you the enormity of the story. There's still a huge reaction to this day every time we write a story about Joe O'Reilly and about Rachel. And we had this on the front page of our paper there on Wednesday the 4th, which was the 19th anniversary of Rachel's murder. I suppose the development at this stage that's I suppose newsworthy is that Joe O'Reilly is now currently in the throes of his 4th bid for release. So he is before the parole board seeking release from prison. And what Rose told me is that this is the first time in her life that she genuinely fears that there is a very real prospect that Joe could be released. Now, he's 16 and a half years in prison. He's not the 19 years in prison. And the average life sentence, you're serving at least 19 years. But it's only 4 years away, 3 years away.
And look, it's called an average for a reason. In other words, some are more and some are less. But I spoke about this before. The late Brian Lenihan, when he was Justice Minister, and it was just shortly after Joe O'Reilly was convicted in 2007. It was basically, he said, he went for lunch with him, and he said he will do 20 years. Now that was a long time at the time, but look, we are getting to that stage, and life doesn't really mean life in Ireland. There are very few people who are in for effectively their whole life. I don't think are there any actually. So he is going to walk free someday. He will be out a life sentence prisoner, and when you get released, you're out on license. So you may recall at any moment, so he's still technically serving his life sentence. But I think people should be prepared. Maybe the next 4 or 5 years, I would say, he will probably walk. And the first indication of that will probably be that he's moved to Shelton Abbey or House, the open prisons.
Yeah, well, I wonder whether the result of this parole bid will mean a move to an open prison. That's the next step, as you say, towards freedom. You've got, for example, Veronica Guerin's killer, Brian Meehan, was moved to Shelton Abbey prison. He's now in the final years of his sentence, and he's doing that in an open prison. We're probably going to see Joe O'Reilly do the same. Whether it's now, I don't know. There's the one glaring thing that goes against Joe O'Reilly is that he has never fessed up. He's never admitted the murder of his wife. He continues to say he didn't do it, and that doesn't help you in terms of getting parole in any way. I just want to mention also just briefly, and you can read our interview on the Mirror Online, but Rose, she gave kind of a fascinating insight into, really when you look at things in hindsight, is there something, she has a lot of regret, and she, I mean, how could you really have seen that your daughter would be murdered? She knows that rationally, but she still kind of has thoughts of, there were signs of problems, and should I have intervened or should I have said something? But she always felt as a mother, that she let her children live her own lives. But she can recall an incident just about a year before the murder occurred, where Rachel showed up at her house in a car, and she was in floods of tears. And she asked her to come in for a cup of coffee, and she said, "I won't come in for a cup of coffee." And she asked her, "Was it Joe? Have you had a row with Joe?" And Rachel just nodded. But she explained that Rachel never really opened up and said out loud that there were problems. She kind of told friends and family little tidbits of things that only when, after the fact, sadly, when they put it all together, they had the whole picture. Obviously Joe was having a extramarital affair with Nikki Pelly, and
he had one before that as well.
Yeah.
I remember tracking down that lady. So yeah, you don't know. It's that old cliche. Nobody really knows what goes on, but behind closed doors.
Sadly,
poor Rachel, terrible.
Yeah, it's a crime that continues to shock the nation. I mean, look, there are crimes every day, but this one I think really captured, everyone's attention, and still does. So we continue to follow for that reason.
And one of the main factors I think in this was Joe's decision to go on the Late Late Show.
Yes,
it was probably 2 or 3 weeks after the murder, and he was a suspect by then. And I mean, Miss Callaly Rose was on the Late Late with him, and I think it just shocked the nation, because people were looking, going, "That fella's bogey. That fella is absolutely bogey," and nobody could really say it, but definitely. And even Rose's attitude to him, she was very. I still remember watching it. She was very still, and she found it very hard to look at O'Reilly, because she knew. So yeah. So I mean, I think that catapulted it up, really up there into the pantheon of really big crime stories.
Yeah, and she said that since that, from that Late Late Show appearance on, she knew that Joe had done it.
Yeah, that's it.
But anyway, we continue to follow that with interest. There have, outside of the courts, been a lot of fascinating things. You mentioned at the start of this pod. Maybe it's worth talking about that now. Just that terrible incident that happened last night.
Yeah, so it happened at 6 minutes past 9 on the Phibsborough Road in North Dublin, and you can see there's video footage of it from a camera, a webcam of a pub in the area, and you can see it's a Honda Civic, and there are 2 lanes on the Phibsborough Road there. I think a bus lane effectively, and it undertakes traffic at really, really fast speed, and then it just goes out of shot, and it literally just out of shot. A lady is killed. Effectively, the woman who was in her 60s, I think she was she would have had links to Garda Síochána herself. I think she would have been related to a retired member of the Guards, and unfortunately, she was hit by the car. There was an interaction. You can see there's a Garda car in the same shot, following the car with its blues and who's on. So obviously, that has been referred to the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission. So there's 2 investigations. There's a criminal investigation by the Gardaí. The car failed to stop. after the incident, I think the lady was killed instantaneously, God love her, but the Honda Civic didn't stop. So there's criminal investigation into that, but obviously because there was an interaction with the guards, that has been referred to the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission under Section 102. That's when there's serious injury or loss of life with a Garda interaction. So the GSOC are doing their own investigation into this as well, but there's still very much a criminal investigation in this, because the people in the car, the woman was killed by the people in the driver of that car. So there's investigation out. So there's a twin track, but it's obviously a very terrible incident for everybody involved.
Horrific, and I saw the footage myself as well. I mean, you see this car speeding through. I mean, it's horrific. Sorry, did you say to me that the person was apprehended, or what's the situation?
No, they were looking for the car last night, and we got word late last night that they found the car. It obviously was a hit and run, so it didn't stop. So I don't know where it's located, but it was the Honda Civic. So they have the car. So that'll be being investigated. You know yourself, Paul, there'll be what they call a TE, a technical examination of it. There's bound to be, they'll be looking for DNA and fingerprints and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, that they understand they have the car intact. So that's obviously a major advance in the investigation. But it is, as I say, there's the twin track investigation, the GSOC one, and the Garda criminal investigation. Two very serious investigations underway.
Horrendous. Did they have any idea of what, I mean, why this car was being pursued in the first place?
I don't know. As ever, these things, we get to hear bits and bobs, and it was a late breaking story last night. So the first we heard was somebody mentioned to say, look, there may have been a fatal with a Garda car nearby. So then, you know, you start digging and bits and pieces come to you. I mean, it's just journalistically, it's we very rarely get the complete picture at the start, and it is often things start to emerge. In fact, we only learned late last night that this person would have been, we understand, would be related to a retired member of Garda Síochána. So it's just bits and bobs, but I presume the person will be identified today. And, you know, I would expect progress in the criminal investigation of this quite quickly.
Just horrific.
Terrible
crime.
Tragedy. Just literally wrong place, wrong time, as ever. So many times it has happened, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you were only talking about this on the pod the other day, you know, just how the randomness of these incidents, you know, it's horrific.
She was just crossing the road, and you know, she may not, I don't even know how far she got on the run. And look, if you look at that video, Paul, that car, that Honda Civic, was going at a really, really breakneck. I think it is fair to say a breakneck speed.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can see, anyone who can see the footage, you can see. I mean, it's just shocking, goes right through the lights.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, shall we talk about the cocaine boat, because there's been another fascinating update in that case?
Yes. So look, obviously it made headlines around the world last week when the MV Matthew was caught. The guards say 157 million. You and I it was 2.25 tons. So we always try and look at it from the street perspective. You know, the guards, to be fair to them, they have the international stuff, but we have to maybe contextualize it more. And to be fair to the guards, they can't say how much it would be diluted, but the Jerry Harrell from Revenue said usually it could be trebled, but he didn't want to go into speculations. That's why we say 450 odd million. So we know that there were 25 people on the ship. The captain wasn't on it, and he'd be careful, but there were 25 people on that ship. As the investigation has continued, 8 people have now been arrested and charged. So 7 people have appeared in court. I think 1 person is appearing in court today, and that does tally with what Assistant Commissioner Justin Kelly said. He, at the very start in the press conference last Wednesday, he said he expected more arrests, and there have been more charges. But look, this is a major investigation, and one of the big aspects about this was the involvement of the Kinahan cartel. Obviously, when any big seizure like this happens, it is where the Kinahan's involved. So I think that the guidance we're getting is they may not have been involved in the selling and the physical distribution of it, but the belief would be that the Kinahan cartel was involved in funding this, because obviously there's a huge amount of funding that goes into it. So look, the Gardai did, for example, release information the other day that investigators from Interpol have come to Ireland to help with this investigation. And that shows the international aspect of this. As they say, drugs crime is now transnational. So the guards do go abroad in investigations, and they're bringing in the Interpol expertise to help with the investigation. So I think it's probably fair to say that there will be more arrests, and there will be more people's collars being felt in relation to this.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I heard you say on the pod, I wanted to ask you about this, just the pod covering the initial story, that this might, in a sense, be kind of only a small drop in the ocean in terms of, they're going to get plenty more drugs through. And I've seen people argue, oh, well, what's the point in the war on drugs? Because they're just going to keep coming back in. But I mean, 500 million worth of cocaine
Yeah.
is not to be taken lightly. I mean, that is a significant portion. Okay, obviously it was maybe only a small portion of that was being taken for this country, but I certainly was under the impression, and certainly from what Justin Kelly said, that I mean this is more significant than just your average drugs bust. I mean, this would have been a serious disruption to multiple drug gangs, including the Kinahan cartel.
Yeah, look, there's no doubt about that. Like, let's not forget this. It's alleged they bought the boat for something like 10 million quid, and they bought various other things for hundreds of thousands and stuff. So, this wasn't a small scale operation. But so look, there's no doubt it was a massive operation. But Maocan, which is this EU's anti-drugs smuggling operation headed by Mick O'Sullivan, formerly headed by Mick O'Sullivan, who has been on the pod a couple of times. I think they've seized about 10 billion euro worth of cocaine in the last 4 or 5 years. That's a lot of cocaine. Now, look,
It's a lot.
it is. They're significant dents. A lot is getting through. More is getting through than it is getting caught. Most people would accept that. It's just, is it 70%? Is it 80%? It could be 6%. We don't know. I mean, because they don't publish it, but a lot does get through. A lot is being caught, and that is testament to Marocain and groups like the Guards and Policia Local and the Guardia Civil in Spain, the NCA in England. There's a concerted international anti-drugs campaign. It is working, but this is a big business. And speaking to Mick O'Sullivan, he would say that Europe is now one of the main areas of business for the Colombian cartels because there's so much money and it makes so much money for them. But the good guys have bad days and the bad guys have bad days. There's no doubt about that.
They clearly thought that Ireland was the weak link, like the back door to Europe in a sense. But hopefully, this shows that that's not the case.
Well, yeah. Look, I did say before when I was talking to Kieran Bradley last week, one of the things about Brexit is gangs are using Ireland more because they previously would have gone to, say, Rotterdam or Antwerp, one of the big ports, and from there they would have brought it over to Britain by Calais or whatever. But there are more administrative checks because of Brexit now. So it's easier to bring it into Ireland. There are still checks, obviously customs still checks and stuff, but there's a common travel area. And it just and you know all about the green channel and the red channel, like boring people about the Windsor Agreement or whatever it is. It's easier to get stuff from Ireland into Britain than it is from Europe into Britain. And that's just the way of the world. And criminals, they will find the path of least resistance. They want as few checks as possible. So that's why they're coming here. So look, there's no doubt. So that's one of the issues that we face. There is an issue with defense force capabilities at the minute, not because it's just basically they don't have enough staff. People are leaving. We know that the defense forces, the naval service, has 6 ships. Well, actually 8, but there are 2 patrol vessels, inshore patrol vessels, bought for 26 million euro from New Zealand earlier this year. They're not in service yet, but they're technically part of the fleet. But there are 6 ships. They can only use 2 at the moment. And even that operation against the MV Matthew, really, talking to military experts, there should have been 2 ships involved in that. There was one, the Ellie William Butler Yeats. There was one AW139 helicopter. There should have been 2 to provide top cover. And things like that. So look, there's no doubt the defence forces, numbers-wise, are at a low ebb and they're really struggling. Now, the Tánaiste Micheál Martin, who's the Minister for Defence as well as Foreign Affairs, says the government is doing everything they can. But this really is an indication of how the defence forces are struggling manpower, personnel-wise. So of course, criminals and transnational criminals are going to try and exploit that. It makes perfect sense for them to do that.
Yeah, and I find this whole topic fascinating, so I will move off it in a second. But just another thing that I found interesting is that doesn't this show, like, in spite of all of the blows that they have taken, the massive pull that the Kinahan cartel still has. I mean, the fact that they're involved in this, and in a sense, they're looked at as the suppliers. They're the ones that have the contacts in Colombia that are able to get the drugs in spite of all the knocks that they've had. They still are a massive powerhouse. I mean, I think that's extraordinary. It's just business as usual for them in spite of everything.
Do you remember when the sanctions were imposed by the Americans last April? Do you remember I did a story, we put it up on the Mirror online, it was in the Star, where I was speaking to a very experienced drugs investigator, and he said, it would be business as usual for the Kinahans. Do you remember that story? I might actually retweet it. I'll put it up there on.
Well, he was right.
He was right. I might owe that fellow a pint. But anyway, so yes, and the Kinahans are the people who have the international contacts. Now, there is a guy from North Dublin who's a very big criminal himself, and we know that he sent one of his main underlings to Colombia a couple of years ago. So there are, and I think Justin Kelly did say this, that there are Irish crime gangs developing contacts in Colombia. But really, as was said to me 12 years ago, the Kinahans are the Man United of crime in Ireland. They're the tier one people, and they have the contacts. That was said by a very senior fella in drugs. So yeah, the Kinahans are where it's at. They have that level of expertise and connections.
Well, I mean, these other gangs would want to hope they're starting to make these connections, because if they do eventually get the Kinahans, and the hope is that they do, that's a huge vacuum that's going to be left there. I mean, that's really at the heart of it. How you're going to stop this from coming in is by cutting it off at the head, isn't it? I mean, the drugs are just going to keep coming in, but you take down the people that have the contacts, and that's what's really going to stop.
But you remember, going back a long time ago, when the Gilligan cartel or the Gilligan gang was dismantled after the murder of Veronica Guerin, people took over from them. So if the Kinahans are done for, we can talk about the family. They're a big, or they would be regarded, the family would be regarded as the biggest crime gang in Ireland operating at the minute. Kinahans are massive, but I don't think they're really operating that much physically in Ireland. So that the family are there. There will always be criminals who take over from other criminals because the profits are so vast. Now, the Kinahans have massive contacts, and that's the different issue, and they are working on an international level. But there will be people who take over from the Kinahans. There's no doubt about that.
Right. I know you're running to go, so let's quickly talk about bananas. Go on.
Yes. So, as ever, I had a story in the Star and the Mirror today about a guard who's under investigation for harassing a female member of the force. Now, and look, in a way, people do find it funny, but essentially the allegation is this guard became aware that the female officer he was allegedly harassing had a phobia of bananas, and as a result, he started harassing her with bananas. So he would do things like leave bananas in Garda cars or in stations. Now, it is, people are laughing at this, but as it was explained to me, that woman has a very serious phobia, and he was, it's sort of like coercive control. And let's be honest, we call it a line. How could I possibly ignore journalistically that this man was allegedly using bananas? So, of course, people can laugh at it, but it is a very, very serious issue, and it's very, very, very troubling for that female officer involved. But anyway, so, and he's also under investigation for allegedly criminally damaging the female officer's locker, breaking into the locker. Very, very, and it has gone on for quite some time. So, there is a criminal investigation. Guards are preparing a file for the Director of Public Prosecutions, and they would be hopeful that, obviously it has plenty of hurdles, but they would believe there's enough evidence prima facie for a case. But it just goes to show you the insidious nature of harassment. And just to give you one example of this, I mean, we report today that effectively this guard, the suspect, was brought in for addressing down about his behavior because people in the area, other guards, were very uncomfortable, and was raised with senior officers, and he was brought in for bollocking, basically. What the hell are you doing? And he wore a banana on his head. Now that's crazy. I mean, this man is brought in to enforce the law, and it is crazy. And people are going to find this funny, but it's very serious. If it's true, it's very, very serious harassment. So look, investigation's ongoing. I would anticipate a file would be sent to DPP in the next couple of weeks, and then it's who knows how long it will take. But it is a very serious investigation, and it was a very serious alleged ordeal that female officer did suffer. And it just goes to show you as I say, the insidious nature of, people getting under people's harassment victims' skins because they know what their weaknesses are. And the allegation is, in this case, that's exactly what this guard did.
Yeah, that is kind of the fact of the story about bananas does obviously make you want to laugh. But
yes,
as you say, it's a very serious campaign of harassment allegedly that went on for some time, and that's why it's an investigation.
Yeah. It is, and it is. People will laugh on it and one level, but I think it is, and we can't ignore it. You can't ignore something like that as journalistically, but it is you know, there is a human here who's allegedly at the brunt of this harassment campaign. So it's very serious, Oliver.
Fascinating. Shall we leave it there?
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Thanks very much.
Cheers now.